Thank you for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books. Before we begin, I want to remind you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many events we're looking forward to is Daniel Barbarisi in conversation with Jason Gay about Barbarisi's new book, Chasing the Thrill: Obsession, Death, and Glory in America's Most Extraordinary Treasure Hunt. Tomorrow night, the 26th, that'll be tomorrow night, the 26th. If you don't already do so, please consider following us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Tonight, we're excited to welcome Jonathan Taplin and Robbie Robertson. Jonathan Taplin is the author of the book, Move Fast and Break Things: How Facebook, Google, and Amazon Cornered Culture and Undermined Democracy, which was nominated by the Financial Times as one of their best business books of 2017. He is the founder of Entertainer, the first streaming video on-demand platform in 1996, and has also produced music and film for Bob Dylan and the Band, George Harrison, Martin Scorsese, Wim Wenders, Gus Van Sant, and many others. Taplin's extraordinary journey has put him at the crest of every major cultural wave in the past half century. He was a tour manager for Bob Dylan and the Band in the 60s, producer of major films in the 70s, an executive at Merrill Lynch in the 80s, creator of the internet's first on-demand video service, and a cultural critic and author writing about technology in the new millennium. With cameos by Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Martin Scorsese, and countless other icons, Taplin's book, The Magic Years, is both a rock memoir and a work of cultural criticism from a key player who watched a nation turn from idealism to nihilism. Taplin offers us a clear-eyed roadmap of how we got here and makes a convincing case for art's power to deliver us from passionless detachment and rekindle our humanism. Joining Taplin in conversation tonight is Robbie Robertson. He received his rock and roll education in the Hawks lineup, who went on to play with Bob Dylan on his legendary Going Electric tours in 1965 and 1966. Moving to Woodstock in 1967, Robertson and his bandmates recorded the seminal Basement tapes with Dylan before changing their name to the band and releasing the groundbreaking Music from Big Pink album in 1968. In 1994, the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Currently, Robertson is writing his follow-up memoir to Testimony and working on music for Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon. So this evening's event will include an audience Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. If someone's typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Jonathan and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his new book from us. A link to buy The Magic Years, along with Robbie's memoir, will be shared in the chat a couple of times this evening. So Jonathan and Robbie, thanks so much for joining us tonight. And now we're going to begin the talk with a brief reading from The Magic Years.
Thank you, Nick. And Robbie, it's such a pleasure to have you join me in this. We've shared an awful lot of wonderful things together. So I'm going to just start with a little short reading. Strapped to a Fender Stratocaster electric guitar, Bob Dylan launched into the opening chords of Maggie's Farm almost before the band was ready. The Newport Folk Festival of 1965 was going to close with a commotion. I had just turned 18 and was an apprentice road manager for Dylan's manager. This explosive moment launched me into a lifelong journey, one beyond anything I could have imagined at the time. I was standing in the stage wing, transfixed, 10 feet from the band. Mike Bloomfield, acting like band leader, brought his Butterfield Blues Band rhythm section, drummer Sammy Lay and bassist Jerome Arnold, into some approximation of sync with Dylan's rhythm. Al Cooper, in a loud polka dot shirt, hunched over the Hammond organ and did his best to fill the spaces, but it wasn't starting well. I ran out towards the mixing booth in front of the stage where Peter Yarrow had commandeered the board. It was worse out front. In his nervousness, Bloomfield kept raising his guitar volume and was now drowning out everything else. The first tune ended on a sour note and there was only light applause from the audience. I gazed behind me, and a look of shock seemed to be the dominant emotion in the sea of blue work shirts and peasant blouses. The man in the tight pants, orange shirt, and black leather jacket was not their Bob Dylan. What was going on? A chorus of boos filled the air before Bob started his radio hit, Like a Rolling Stone. But the end of the fans were still booing. Voices from the crowd called for their favorite tune from the folk era. The band looked nervous, but without a word to the audience, Bob plunged into It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry. The band found their groove, but when the tune ended, the booing got worse. Dylan turned to Bloomfield and said, "Let's split." To the surprise of the other musicians and the road crew, he unplugged his Fender and walked up the stage. Instantly, the crowd went silent. People started yelling at each other in the aisles. "Look what you did. He's gone, asshole." Peter Yarrow bolted from the mixing console and they followed him backstage. Dylan was sitting on the bottom steps of the stairway leading up to the stage. He was clearly shaken, rubbing his eyes. Peter ran onto the stage and seized the microphone. "Hey, show Bobby that you love him. Let's get him back." The audience roared approval. Dylan sat still on the steps. The audience began to clap in rhythm. Dylan refused to budge. Peter appeared at the top of the stairs, pleading with him to return. Johnny Cash wandered out of the artist tents holding an acoustic guitar. For a minute, he watched the triangular drama of Peter, Bob, and the crowd. He moved over to Bob and handed him the guitar. "Play them a song, son." Bob took the guitar and slowly walked up the 30 steps to the stage. When he appeared in the lone spotlight, holding the acoustic guitar, the cheers from the audience were deafening. He leaned towards the microphone, raised his harmonica holder. "Does anyone have a D harmonica?" Out of the crowd, three of Hohner's finest sailed through the air into the stage. Dylan danced out of the way and, grinning, picked up one and placed it in his holder. He started to strum the guitar and played "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue." When he finished the song, he rushed through Mr. Tambourine Man and then turned and, without a word, quickly walked off the stage. He had said his piece. They did not own him, and like a lover leaving a bad relationship breakup, he would not turn back. So, Robbie, you kind of had to experience the same experience 2 months later, right?
Well, this was before my time, this Newport Folk Festival thing. And so I just got hearsay of it. And it's a folk festival. And I thought if Bob, if he wanted to say, people, I want to become a rock star. I'm already a folk prophet. I want to become a rock star. I don't know if that was the time and place for it, but I didn't know anything. I had only played rock and roll all my life. I had very little connection to the folk music scene. So when I hooked up with Bob at this time, and he was wanting to make this transition, he wanted to grow out of something that he found, that he discovered, that he took to another place that nobody had ever seen before. And I guess he was saying, all right, we got that. Now what are we going to do? And I think if somebody was standing back and looking at it, you think, okay, there's a lot of people out there that come out of folk music, and now they got an amplifier they're plugging their guitar into. I think there was just something in the air, something in the thing, something that could be more adventurous. And so it reminds me, I was writing a thing in the follow-up testimony that I'm writing right now, volume 2 of my memoir. There's a place in there where Bob and I are hanging out, and he's playing a bunch of different folk artists' music for me. And he's playing this stuff for me, and he's trying to teach me and to help me understand what is so special about this and about this kind of music. And I thought, wow, some of these are very meaningful. Some of them's really telling a story. Some of it's really, the Woody Guthrie's and everyone are really laying a groundwork to build on of something. But he's playing me these songs and he's playing me these songs. And I say to myself, because like I said, I grew up in rock and roll. And for me, it was Bebop-A-Lula and Lucille and, you know, Chuck Berry and all the fathers of rock and roll that turned my life upside down. He's playing me all these records and these people I've never heard of. And some of it were very nice songs. But I said, Bob, I can't get laid to this. This music is not sexy. Rock and roll is sexy. Let's play some sexy music. Let's take what you're doing and take it to the place where we all yearn for that certain kind of physical feeling out of music. And he was like, well, that's exactly what we want to do. So we ended up on this journey. We ended up getting together, experimenting, and it was so clear that Bob he had been a one-man show. Him on a guitar, harmonica, you know, singing his folk song. Now, with a group, it's a different thing. It has to be organized. It has to be arranged. There has to be some thought behind it. And Bob came at it from a place of, okay, let's just pick up a guitar, play it, and get out of here. You know what I mean? There was no method to the madness. So we went through an incredible period of teaching one another a deeper place in music than we ever realized at the time. I was 21 when this was going on, when I hooked up with him. And we were learning a lot from one another. And when, again, after the thing with Newport that you experienced, we played all over the world, all over North America, Australia, Europe, everywhere. And people booed us every night. It didn't matter what you did, so to me, the best part of it was that in a case like that, anybody else, you would say, whoa, the audience isn't really digging on this. We should make some changes. Why don't we do this song like that and that one quieter and then come in slower on this one? No. All we did was go out and play harder and faster. And in that, you had a sense inside you that you were part of a musical revolution. And at some point on that tour, I remember when they came, because they were doing some filming, and they came and there was a sound guy with a little tape machine. And he recorded the show we did. And we went back to the hotel after the show and listened to what we had just done. We listened to a tape of it. And I said to Bob and to the other guys in the band, they're wrong. The world is wrong.
Right.
And I don't care. This is good. This has something nothing else has. And the idea of feeling like it was you against the world, you had to be very young to be able to get behind that and think that you were bold enough to be able to pull that off. But that was the ingredients, really, of a musical revolution.
You know, for those of us who've luckily gotten to hear those tapes, because Jeff Rosen has put some of them out as what he called bootlegs of the live shows that you did, like in Manchester and other places where people are yelling Judas and all that. It is some of the best music that was ever made, ever. And yet, why do you think the folkies so resisted this change in Bob?
Well, because he came in on that train. Came in on the train with Joan Baez and all of the folk people and everything, and it was folk music. And folk music had its own world. It had its own huge following. And it was important and in its own way. But if you want to cross over the tracks or we play rock and roll, well, then you better get ready to get your hands dirty, because that transition there is not going to go down smoothly. And I, from my point of view, I could see all these other groups that were all folkies, but didn't want to really admit it, or they weren't that good at it or whatever. And all of them, they started becoming this thing called folk rock.
Right.
And it was a name like any other name. But I said to Bob one time, I know what we don't do. We don't do folk rock. We don't do folk rock. This ain't folk rock. These aren't folk songs. These are rock and roll songs. And we're playing them as they should be played. And in that whole thing of building a spine, of building a confidence, when people boo you every night, everywhere you go around the world, it can step on your confidence a little bit, and try to build back up and not be full of it, be true. And you must know that the guys in the band, which we were the Hawks at the time, we'd already been together several years. We'd been woodshedding. We'd been honing our skills. He hired us as a band, to make this transition because it was built in. It was already real.
Right.
He didn't have to make it real. This wasn't some studio musicians that you threw together and went out and do a tour with. It wasn't trying to get Paul Butterfield's blues band to try to play Bob Dylan music. They weren't into that.
Right.
They would do it. I mean, anybody, will step up for a minute, but they didn't want to do that. And this connection of God knows where that came from, of where he was coming from and we were coming from. And you added those two things together and something exploded in the sky.
So you talked about Bob playing you some old folk music, and I assume that maybe this was in the period in 67 and 68 when
No, it was 65.
65. Okay.
The end of 65.
Right. But
and he was trying to convince me that it wasn't, that there was two sides to the coin.
Right.
That where he comes from in folk music, there's something really special about that too. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not sexy.
Right.
I'm sorry. We do sexy. Rock and roll is sexy, and I don't know how to get with if I had a hammer. Right.
But in the period when you guys were making what we now call the basement tapes, so you had set up this house in Saugerties called Big Pink, and Bob and you started just woodshedding in the sense that you were making some music for yourself. Did that period change your own songwriting way of thinking about how songs were?
Yeah. So the Big Pink, this had been a dream of mine for years that I discussed with the other guys in the group. And I said, one day, I want to have a woodshed. I want to have a sanctuary. I want to have a clubhouse. I want to have a place where we go and we turn the world off and we make the music that we were meant to make. And I don't know, it's my own inability, but I don't know how to do that when everybody's walking around and carrying on. And I don't know how to do that. It's my dream to have that. So Rick Danko of the band, he found this place out there, went out there, this ugly pink house. And I said, this is perfect. So we started putting it together to do exactly what I had wanted to do for a long time. And then one day, I brought Bob out there to see it, to see what we were putting in the basement there. Comes out and he says, wow, I didn't know you could do this. Can you record music down here? I said, well, we got our little tape recorder and some mics. Of course we can. And then for what we were going to do as the band, Bob came into that. And he started coming every day and hanging out. Then a process happened of people in a sanctum, in a solitary environment, making music with the freedom that nobody will ever hear this, and we don't care. And Bob had an obligation at the time for his music publishers. They were like, we need some new songs. Everybody recorded Bob Dylan songs back then. So the publisher's like, we need some more songs, write some songs. So anyway, Bob said, I got to write some songs, while we're here. So, but what we would do, we would go there and I would, out of the air, I would pull a song title that I was sure Bob didn't know. And he'd pick up a guitar and start singing it. And I had never seen, for the first time with him, and we'd been hanging out day and night by this for a couple of, I had never seen anybody with that many words of other people's songs in his head, besides all the words of his own songs in his head. And he would sing the song, and it was just a blast. And we did that. And then we would lay down some songs, and then we would have some fun with it. And then there was a looseness, a freedom, an artistic bubble that we were in that had no connection to the rest of the world. And it freed us to do something in the basement tapes, which led to the band's first album, Music from Big Pink, with a sense of freedom that I'd never heard of before.
So in a sense, the second album that we did in Los Angeles was also that same sense of let's have a place where there's no clock ticking, there's no time limits. It's just us in this room with a tape recorder, right? Wasn't it somewhat similar? It
was unheard of. That, when I went to the record company, and we're in Los Angeles, and they at Capitol Records, they have one of the most famous studios in the world. Right. There's all of these studios, Phil Spector's place, everybody's studios. And I said, no. We're not going 5 minutes over to the studio. We're going to bring the equipment and put it in this house. And we're going to record in our own environment. And they had never, ever heard of such madness before. But because music from Big Pink became kind of a phenomenon and it was changing the course of music, they said, yes, we need to do it. So they did it. They did what I asked them to do. We set up there at Sammy Davis Jr.'s pool house, which you helped set up. And we had a family environment that music was the center of. And it was a way for musicians to do work where you don't go home at night, you don't ever leave. You stay there until you get it right, and until you do something that will make somebody cry. You know, you put an emotion into that thing, and that's what became the band album, which then went on again and had such an effect on the course of music and culture at the time.
So, you know, when I've done these earlier talks, you know, I tell in the book the story of our debut at Winterland in San Francisco and the story of the hypnotists. And a lot of people think that can't be true. Can you give me?
Oh, yes, it can.
Can you give me your own point of view on how that occurred and maybe how it led into See the Man with Stage Fright?
When we made the band album at the Sammy Davis Jr. house, I was on a mission. I had to write the songs. I had to figure out the arrangements. I had to figure out how to keep the guys in a circle. I had so much on my plate. I wanted it. I asked for it, and I got it. And by the time we had finished recording at Sammy Davis Jr.'s, I didn't have nothing left. I was spent. And I was spent mentally, physically, every way. So then it's like, oh, now we got to go and play our first concert
in front of 7,000
San
people.
Francisco. And I'm like, I could hardly get my head transferred from this place that I was in to accepting that idea. But we promised to do it. So we went up and to San Francisco. And on the plane ride going up there, I thought, God, I think I have a fever. I don't know what's going on. And by the time we got there, just my immune system had crashed and I fell apart. I gave it all. I knew I had nothing left. And I remember you saying, guys, we're going to have to change, telling Bill Graham, Bill, we can't do this. I mean, Robbie is just so sick. He has a fever. He can't move. And everybody's like, there's been such a buildup to this. We cannot pull the plug. We can't do it. And between you, Albert Grossman, somehow I ended up with a man by the name of Pierre Clement in my room, hypnotizing me. And I said, I'll try anything. I feel so sick. You know, I wasn't worried about the concert. I was just feeling so bad that I wanted any kind of relief. And this guy, I'll be damned if he didn't come in there and put some hoodoo on me. And the next thing, he had me standing up. He had me feeling better. Then he had me having a little soup, and he said, and now we are going to go to the concert hall and you're going to perform in front of all these people. And I was like, I didn't know where I was. And he said, but here's the thing. When you go up on that stage and you're playing the music, you know how to play the music. We're not worried about that. When you go up on that stage, physically, you're very ill. If you start feeling a little faint or a little shaky, I'm going to you look over at me. I'm going to be in the side over there. And I'm going to say to you, grow. And I'm like, grow? Okay. And we went up and played. And sure enough, I thought I was going to faint. And I looked over and the crowd is screaming and we're in the middle of a song and the applause and the noise and everything. And I could hear him right in my ear say, grow. And And I came back, and he did it a couple of times. He brought me back a couple of times, and then he said, "That's it. That's it. We can't do it anymore." And we got through that first night, which was one of the most surreal opening concerts, perhaps, that anybody could make.
Right. So, Robbie, when I did the concert for Bangladesh with George Harrison, he talked to me. The Beatles were just breaking up, and they had started in 1960, which I believe was the exact same time that you and the Hawks really got started. And he said to me, keeping a band together past 10 years is really hard. It's very hard to keep a band together. And I know that you and the band managed to make it to 14 years or 15 years.
No, 16 years was the last Waltz.
Yeah.
16 years.
But do you think this whole notion of trying to hold a band together, and Don Henley said the same thing to me, that it's really hard to hold a group of 4 or 5 or 6 people together for a long period of time?
Well, a lot of people are married to one person, and it's a balancing act. It's tricky. Imagine being married to 4. These guys over there that have all those wives. I'm telling you, it's not what you think. It is, and we went through, what happens is you start out in your kids and you're all in it together, and then you grow to another stage and people go off and they get married, and we're no longer in that circle. The circle keeps separating and separating more and more. People change their ways. One guy's into this. You and I were watching movies. The other guys never watched a movie in their life.
Right. Right.
We were doing stuff going in a certain direction, and that didn't fit with everybody. But I know, but they're my brothers. I love them, and I'm going to do everything to band-aid this together as long as I could. And I did it upside down. I did it. And then finally I said, guys, I've got a great idea. Let's do a thing called The Last Waltz.
Right.
Because I couldn't do it anymore.
So, I never forget, after the concert for Bangladesh, there was an after party, and Eric Clapton had barely managed to get through the concert. He was having a real addiction problem. And you said to him, man, get your life together. I mean, I've seen people die from this shit. And it seemed to me that some guitar players like Eric and Keith Richards and Jimi Hendrix had a kind of Robert Johnson fantasy, kind of romanticize that rock and roll was all about living hard and dying young. And somehow you managed to avoid that completely. What was that? Was that having to do with your family roots or what?
Some instinct. And really, I think the bottom line in what this is talking about is addiction. Some people get the fever, and the fever won't leave, and they don't know. And what happens is other people can say, whoa, I'm gonna ride real close to the edge, but damn it, I ain't gonna fall over the ledge. I don't want to do that, but I'll go close. And when you're young and everything, a lot of foolish things seem to make sense at the time. But Eric, bless his heart, he was one of those people that found out he had the fever. In the band, I had 3 guys in my group that had the fever.
Right.
and trying to juggle that and trying to make sense out of that. And perhaps what that did to me was because I needed to be the one responsible into some kind of way to hold this shit together. I couldn't afford to get as loosey goosey. Now, believe me, I was no angel. And, you know, and I went through craziness too, as you did too. And we were all there.
Right.
But some of us, we had a tie line and it kept us from falling over the side.
Yeah, but I also remember in 69 and 70, I would come over to your house and you would be up at 9 o'clock in the morning writing songs in your little studio. And
It's my job.
I couldn't get
my job, John.
I couldn't get
I
the other
wasn't being
guys.
heroic. I wasn't being the best guy in the group or anything. I didn't give a shit if the other guys didn't get up early in the morning. I had a job. I had to take something out of the air that didn't exist and make it exist.
Right.
That was my responsibility. I thought everybody could write songs. I thought they were being lazy in the beginning. Then I realized some people, Keith, and we've talked about with Levon, that Levon didn't have that chip.
Right.
Levon, neither does Ringo Starr or
Right.
Charlie Watts or 100 other people. Some people are songwriters and some people are not songwriters. And it took me a long time to get it through my thick skull that I could not force this on anybody. Either you are or you aren't. So I got up early in the morning and did this stuff. And when we were making the Brown album and Sammy Davis Jr., I was up all night. My first daughter, Alexander, was born. I was up with Dominique taking care of the baby, trying to write songs, trying to do all of it. That's part of why I fell apart too, before we got to San Francisco. Right. But I really just thought I'd been writing songs professionally since I was 15. So I thought, this is my responsibility. I'm not being a hero.
Right. So I'd like to just switch gears a little bit to talk about Marty Scorsese, in the sense that, when we made Mean Streets, Marty said, I want to score this with songs from the radio, like real songs. And when I made Until the End of the World with Vim, which you contributed a song to that too, and so did T-Bone and others, he wanted to score it with songs. Why is it that Marty and Vim and guys like that think that songs, and God, you've done 10 or 15 movies with Marty, helping him find the music for instead of using a lush orchestral score, what is it about real songs that kind of boosts the emotional output of movies?
John, it's really with Marty. So after we did The Last Waltz, then he's doing this movie, Raging Bull.
Right.
And when Marty and I had been housemates together, I'd play him a lot of music. He'd show me a lot of movies. In that, somewhere, we made a connection of what I turned him on to. And for him, it was like, ooh, I could use this. And then when he was doing Raging Bull, he asked me to do the source music. I a couple of the things in the movie were ideas. Most of it was from his Little Italy upbringing of music that you would hear just leaking out of apartments in the neighborhood. But in making Raging Bull, there was a breakthrough. There was a thing that happened that went above and beyond and beside anything that people were doing in movies and the way music was used. And it took you inside a world and deep inside a person's emotional heart in this film that is, to this day, is one of the greatest of all times. So then we did that. Then the next movie comes up and he says, I don't know, what do you think? You want to? So I said, well, you know, we might, and every movie, and all of the movies that I've worked on with Marty over the years, everyone has been a completely different challenge. It isn't like, oh, we find some songs and we throw them in a movie. No, no, no. In some movies, I've used score from other movies in the movie, right, because it was so soulful. It was so powerful. And I'm like, can we do that? And it would be like, yes, it would be an homage to the filmmaker. That would, all of these things, there were no rules. And to this day, no matter whether a couple of movies ago, I said, we got to use all modern music in this, all modern composers and everything. He's like, oh, really? And I sent him stuff to him. Now we're working on a thing where he's making an American Indian story in Killers of the Flower Moon. This could be my calling after all these years. Part of my heritage. My mom's from the Mohawk Nation. I grew up in that. Marty thinks, well, if ever we were going to do something, we're doing it now. And I can't wait. They're shooting now in Oklahoma, and I can't wait to go down and get with the people there, the Osage people. What a story they've got to tell. And I can't wait to go and dig in, and I'm already stirring with stuff. So it's a thing. Him and I, we just go to work. We don't know why, what, we don't know who, anything. We just go to work and we try to do something really, really good. And that's the way it's been since the last Waltz. Right. And we're still doing it to this day. I'm kind of grateful for that.
It's fabulous. So Nick.
Hey, yeah. We've got quite a few questions here. So I'm going to start off one. We just mentioned the last Waltz. So I have a question here that says, please set the record straight about whether Bob Dylan was a reluctant participant in the last Waltz, as has been said.
So I think I can speak to that. You know, Bob was in the middle of making a movie called Ronaldo and Clara, and with a guy named Howard Alk. And so Howard, who came with Bob to San Francisco, was very concerned that somehow Bob's appearance in the last Waltz would reduce the importance of Ronaldo and Clara. And so Bob told him to be quiet, essentially. But we negotiated that Bob would do 3 songs that we could film. So he does the 3 songs, and then as he's finishing the 3 songs, the 3rd song, he just transitions without a break into Baby, Let Me Follow You Down. And I was standing right next to Marty and Bill Graham on the corner of the stage, and Louis Kemp, who was Bob's handler at the time, says, well, this is a 4th song. You have to stop the cameras. And Marty's saying, no. And Bill Graham basically says to Louis Kemp, get off the stage, get out of here. This is going forward. And so we ended up filming Baby, Let Me Follow You Down. And anyway, Robbie, you have anything to add to it?
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, Bob was making a film and he thinks, oh my God, and now you guys, you got Martin Scorsese, you got all of this stuff. I don't want to do anything dumb. I don't want to do anything like, I'm going to do this, and it's going to make what I'm doing, you know, just like John said. So anyway, we went round and around in it, and we promised to not release The Last Waltz until after Ronaldo and Clara came up, and we resolved it. But for the band's story, for The Last Waltz, to not have Bob be part of that story, it would be incomplete. And so, you know, we had to get it done, and thankfully we did. And Bob was fantastic.
All right, so so we'll do another question here. It's this question says, I was lucky enough to see 2 shows on Tour 74 by Bob Dylan and the band. Robbie, we know your role in those terrific shows, but Jonathan, what was your role as tour manager then? What did it consist of?
I was not on that tour.
No.
I did the first concert in Chicago, and then I handed it off to Lindsay Holland, who had been my backup tour manager for the band for many years, and Lindsay took that tour.
Okay. So so the next one is another. It says, it's interesting that a band of 4 Canadians and a rascal from Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, laid the foundation for what we think of as Americana music during the psychedelic heyday. It was such a contrast. Was your musical approach a reaction against the psychedelia of the time?
No, there was no. We just weren't paying attention. You know, as psychedelia of the time. We like I said earlier, we lived in our workshop, in our sanctuary, and we were trying to make music as true to ourselves as we could, and we were trying to avoid the outside world the best we could. And the combination of those 2 things is what added to that music.
That's good. Yeah. So a question for Jonathan. Jonathan, you can be seen wandering around in Robbie's studio in Woodstock in a video recording of King Harvest from 1969 or 1970. Can you talk about what you remember from the day that video was made? Are there more video recordings from that time that haven't been released?
Yeah, we got a guy named Gordon Sawyer to come up, and you know, this was before there were music videos, and Robbie had this great studio, and I think we probably shot about 4 songs.
I think we only did 2. I think we did Cripple Creek and King Harvest.
Right.
And because that's all the film that he had.
Right.
So we shot those 2 songs.
And
as I recall, I don't remember anything else. I don't think anything else.
Yeah. And, you know, a good part of them are in the movie that Robbie did last year, the Band of Brothers. And it's pretty great. You know, I was amazed how good it was in terms of the feel. And it really captures, I must say that at that point in 69, everything was working beautifully. It was, I mean, everybody was behaving themselves. Richard was only drinking at night after a concert, not day drinking. And, you know, in those days, nobody had discovered cocaine or anything. It was just pot. And so everyone was in pretty good shape. And it shows in that thing, you know. I mean,
it's true in that film. This is, and it was really, and you can see it in there, how these guys, they would just get up in the morning, and then we go get together, and we come and we sit down, you know, behind our instruments, and we just do our job. And in that film of those 2 songs, you really see the communication between the guys and their eyes, the signals, the everything. You're kind of inside our little world at that time. And I was thrilled that they used it I mean, I've been so fortunate that they made this great documentary. Imagine, and Scorsese had made this great documentary, Once We're Brothers, based on my book Testimony. And I don't know, John, if I've even told you yet, but one of the greatest playwrights and best screenwriters in the world, Jess Butterworth, is writing the story of the band for Warner Brothers.
Wow.
Yeah, and he's just finishing up the first draft.
How cool.
People, that's just between John and me.
So I'm going to ask it. So in those early Electric Dylan days, was the booing an affirmation for Bob in that it was shaking people up? If the audience had blindly accepted it, would it have been in some way disappointing?
Nah,
Okay.
nah. People really, it became a ritual. It became a thing that you would go to these concerts, and if you were a folk music enthusiast, you would boo at the electric music and everything. For Bob just wanted to play his music, and he wanted to play it as honestly as he possibly could. All this other shit came from somebody else's world. It didn't come from our world. And so we just dealt with it the best we could. Well, I've never heard of anything in the history of music that anybody plays a world tour and people boo them every night, and it turns out to be extraordinary, revolutionary music. I had never heard that story. So we didn't know how to say to one another, oh, it's going to be okay.
So, Robbie, I will tell you that story actually existed once before. Stravinsky wrote a ballet called The Rites of Spring.
Oh, I know.
That was debuted in Paris, and everybody booed him off the stage, and it's now considered Stravinsky's greatest work.
Yeah, but he didn't do a world tour with
No,
it.
that's true.
So another question here is, Robbie, it says, Robbie, I admire your work. Is there anything in the music you have written that now in retrospect you wish you had written differently?
No.
Okay. All right. So the most upvoted question here is about, thank you both for your roles in making wonderful music. Robbie, have you had any more experiences with hypnosis since the time in San Francisco?
No, but I'm ready.
Okay, that's good. Let's see. I'm going to do this one next. Robbie, you and the band were incredible. Did the fact that you're Canadian influence your music?
Yes, of course. And one of the magical things that we didn't realize at the time, so when I was 16, I went from Canada down to the Mississippi Delta to hook up with Levon and Ronnie Hawkins, and they were all from Arkansas. There was no Canadians in Southern rock and roll bands. It was almost against the law to have a Canadian in a group. And going down there and absorbing this music, this culture, this sound and everything was, for me, it was like going to the crossroads. And I had the opportunity to do that. And taking what I had from Canada and in my own whatever world that I grew up in and mixing it with that, it was a gumbo that I mixed together, this Canadian and this Southern thing. And out of this group came a sound and came a flavor that was unlike anything people had heard before.
Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. There's a point in the last waltz where Levon talks about what is so special about the Delta, and he talks about that just somehow this mix of country and blues and rock and roll all came together and created something very unique. And I mean, part of the joy of being with the band was the ability to kind of keep that going. And in a sense, you know, I noticed one of your questioners used the term Americana. I think before music from Big Pink and before the Basement Tapes, there was no such thing as Americana. And you know, Marcus Mumford has told me that the band invented the whole genre.
Well, you know, and to be completely legitimate about that, John, I think back in the day, back in the 20s or 30s, I think there was a musicality that came out of the mountains, that came from wherever it was, and that was an Americana. I think, you know, if
Like the
you know,
Carter family?
if you were to look, to look it up,
Yeah.
that existed in that kind of way. In rock and roll, and no one ever heard of that word. It didn't exist.
Right.
And I never heard it until they called the band's music Americana. And I said, excuse me, folks, it's called North Americana.
So next question. The music business has changed enormously since the 60s and 70s. From your standpoint, what has been lost and has anything been gained?
Well, my question is, you know, something that I raised in my last book, which is, I don't think musicians have a good way to get paid right now. I mean, the band could make an album for $50,000 and sell maybe 50,000 copies, and they'd already be in profits. And by the time you'd sold 150,000 copies, you were actually making good money. And today, you have to get 6 million streams on Spotify in order to make yourself, you know, $100,000. And it doesn't seem to me that the business is sustainable under the current way, with YouTube able to put every piece of music out for free and nobody gets paid. I mean, I don't know what you think, Robbie, about this, but.
Well, I think these times, they've led us to a place that we went through a period where all of a sudden they were like, oh my God, music is free. All the work you do doesn't matter. Now it's free and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, then they say, well, it's not completely free. You can make a little money from this, and some people can do that and do that. The music business on a business level of recordings is a completely different world now. And it's not fair to the artists. And I don't think anybody except music companies would disagree with that, but it's not fair to the artists. We all know that. So it's evolved to a different place of saying, oh, okay, well, now if you get this and you can go out on tour, and now people make, you know, a lot of money, a lot more money on tours and everything. So it's moved over here, this is moved over there and everything. But to really answer the essence of this question is, what's changed? What's different with people in music? And from the period that we were talking about, where music was the voice of a generation, music, people lived by this music. It played as big a part in your life as anything did. And that's wonderful. It was great. It was a period of time. They were assassinating, you know, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy, and they were crushing things down, and they were having a war, and people unified. People were all together. God, right now, I don't even know what it is we lived in, but we were really like one for all and all for one. And music sat at the center of that. And we were very proud to be able to share that and try to do something that meant something real in your life. And now, today in music, and believe you me, there is some there's always extraordinary music being made. Doesn't matter what happens, there's always somebody who's going to do something amazing. And there is great music being made, but it's not the voice of a generation. And it's wonderful. You know, there's great entertainment in it. There's some great fun in it. There's cultural things in it, but it ain't that. It's a whole other thing, and that's okay. But I don't know if that'll ever exist again.
Yeah. Well, so we probably maybe I'll just kind of probably almost have to wrap things up soon. Maybe I can ask one more question here. I have a viewer from Calcutta, India. So I'm going to ask their question. This is: at the end of Band of Brothers, Robbie, you talk of waiting for the band to come back after having done the last waltz so that you could make music again, but they didn't come back. Was it that you wanted to continue and they didn't?
Well, the documentary is called Once Were Brothers.
Oh, Once Were Brothers. Yeah, that's okay.
Once Were Brothers.
Yeah.
And in this, because we had been doing something kind of magical for a long time together in a brotherhood and everything, you don't want to let that go.
Yeah.
You don't want to see that go up in flames. But in time, things change. And eventually, as I say in the documentary, eventually it did go up in flames. Did I want to continue trying to make some magical music with these guys? Of course, but you can only do what you can do. And everybody just went to a place, and it was a new setting. We were no longer these young guys that got together and said, let's change the world. Mm-hmm. We weren't that anymore. And so trying to pull those things back and everything, finally your fingers get tired and you say, you know what, I'm gonna let it be real. And I'm gonna, and it was the most magical, and it was wonderful. And my memories and love for my brothers in the band is unending.
All right. Well, that's a great place to kind of end things. So thank you, Robbie and Jonathan, so much for joining us tonight. That was just an amazing conversation. We got so many questions. I hope we only got through a fraction of them, and it's great that so many people are excited about that. And I encourage everyone to get a copy of The Magic Years. Buy that at powells.com to support us and to support Jonathan, and also check out Robbie's books there, and check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events, and we look forward to seeing you all at another event. And Jonathan, Robbie, once again, thank you so much. It was fantastic.
And thank you to you, Nick, and Powell.
Absolutely.
We love Powell. Signing off.
We appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right.
Great.
Good night, guys.
Thanks. Bye, Rob.
All right, bye,
Love,
everyone.
John.